My name is Claire Bennett. I am 34 years old, and the night my family ordered $5,000 of lobster in my name was the night I discovered they had been stealing from me for almost 7 years. It happened at Bellamy House, the kind of waterfront restaurant where the menus had no prices and the servers folded your napkin whenever you stood up. My mother had invited everyone: my parents, my younger brother Daniel, his wife Melissa, my aunt and uncle, even 2 cousins I had not spoken to since college. I thought we were celebrating my father's retirement. Then the seafood towers arrived. Whole lobsters, oysters, imported champagne, plates of truffle pasta no one had asked for. Daniel laughed as another bottle was opened. "Relax, Claire, tonight is special." I should have noticed that nobody else reached for a menu. I should have noticed how quickly my mother handed the wine list back. I should have noticed the small look she exchanged with my father when the server asked who was hosting. But I had spent my whole life smoothing over uncomfortable moments, so I smiled. I ate almost nothing. 3 hours later, the server placed a black leather folder beside my hand. The total was $4,086. I pushed it toward my father. He pushed it back. "Your mother told us you were paying." The table went quiet. Not surprised. Waiting. That was worse. Daniel leaned back and said I earned more than everyone else, so I should stop making a scene. My mother touched my wrist and reminded me that family takes care of family. I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. Before I tell you what I did next, please like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. Because I did not pay that bill. Instead, I opened my banking app to prove my mother had never asked me for permission. And there it was. A payment I did not recognize. Then another. Then 47 more, all connected to the same account. My father's. My hands started shaking, not from fear, from recognition. I knew every one of those transactions. I just never knew where they had ended up. I work as a compliance auditor for a regional healthcare network. Every day I review financial records, payment histories, authorization logs, and digital signatures. My entire career is built on noticing patterns that everyone else ignores. That habit had followed me home. I rarely spent money without documenting it. Every recurring payment lived inside a spreadsheet that automatically compared my bank statements against my monthly budget. It was a system I had built after my divorce, because I promised myself I would never again lose control of my finances. So seeing dozens of unfamiliar transfers was impossible. I never missed anything. The server was still standing beside the table. "Would you like me to process the payment?" I looked up. "Could you give me 2 minutes?" "Of course." He stepped away. My mother forced a smile. "Claire, everyone is waiting." I didn't answer. Instead, I opened 6 months of statements. The same recipient appeared again. And again. Always small enough to avoid attention. $200, $300, $500, sometimes $800. Never enough to trigger a fraud alert. But together, almost $80,000. My stomach turned. Daniel rolled his eyes. "Seriously? You're checking your investments while we're sitting here." I looked directly at him. "Do you know what Oak Ridge Holdings is?" His expression froze for less than a second. Then he shrugged. "Never heard of it." Too quickly, much too quickly. I had spent years interviewing vendors during compliance investigations. People rarely lied with their words. They lied with timing. Honest people searched their memory. Liars answered immediately. My father cleared his throat. "Can we finish this at home?" "No." My voice surprised even me. "We can finish it right here." The table fell silent. I rotated my phone so everyone could see the screen. "Does anyone want to explain why my account has been sending money to Oak Ridge Holdings every month?" Nobody spoke. Melissa stared at her plate. My aunt suddenly became fascinated by her wine glass. Even my cousins looked uncomfortable. Only my mother finally sighed. "Claire? Not everything has to become an investigation." I looked at her. "Who owns Oak Ridge Holdings?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for my phone. I pulled it away. "No, not this time." The server returned with perfect timing. "Have we decided how you'd like to handle the bill?" My father smiled at him. "She's paying," I interrupted, before another word could leave his mouth. "Actually, we'll all be paying separately tonight." The server looked confused. "We don't usually, then split it manually, please." An awkward silence spread across the dining room. Other tables had begun watching us. Daniel slammed his hand onto the table. "This is embarrassing," I nodded. "You're right. It is embarrassing. Especially since someone has apparently been taking money from my account for years." His face changed. Just for an instant. A flash of panic. Then it disappeared. My professional instincts screamed at me. I had seen that exact expression before. Not during family dinners. During fraud interviews. I paid only for my own meal. Nothing more. As I walked toward the exit, my phone vibrated. A notification from my home computer. My nightly backup had finished syncing. Attached was an automated audit report I had completely forgotten creating months earlier. The subject line made my blood run cold. I stared at the notification until the restaurant door closed behind me. The evening air felt cold. Too cold. I read it again. Unauthorized banking access detected from a device registered to my parents' home address. My first instinct was denial. There had to be another explanation. Maybe my laptop had confused an old login. Maybe I had once signed in while visiting my parents. Maybe... No, I stopped myself. Hope was useful in relationships. It was dangerous during an investigation. I opened the report. Every login was listed. Date, time, device fingerprint, IP address, authentication method. The first unauthorized login appeared 5 years and 8 months earlier, a Tuesday, at 8:17 in the evening. I remembered exactly where I had been, working late, preparing an audit for a hospital acquisition. While I was still in the office, someone had logged into my online banking from my parents' house. I kept scrolling. There weren't 3 or 4 logins. There were 92. My chest tightened. Not because of the money, because of the planning. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a system. Someone had built a system around me. My phone rang. Mom. I let it ring. Then Dad. Ignored. Daniel. Ignored. Finally, a text. "Claire, stop acting crazy. We can explain." I didn't answer. Instead, I drove home. The moment I walked through my apartment door, I opened my desktop computer. Everything I owned was backed up automatically. Every bank statement, every email, every tax return, every notification. Years earlier, my mentor at work, Margaret Ellis, had laughed at my obsession with documentation. One day, it will save your career. Neither of us imagined it might save my life instead. I opened the audit file. The software highlighted every unusual banking event. A neat timeline appeared across the screen. Transfers, password resets, recovery email changes, security questions. Then I noticed something strange. My recovery phone number had been modified 4 years earlier, for exactly 11 minutes, then changed back. Whoever had done it understood banking security. They knew how long they needed access. I compared the timestamp with my calendar. That evening, my parents had insisted on taking me out for dinner. I remembered leaving my purse in their hallway. Only for a few minutes, just long enough. A sick feeling settled over me. They hadn't guessed my passwords. They had reset them, legally, using my own phone. I leaned back. Every piece fit, almost, except one. Oak Ridge Holdings. I searched the company in the Public Business Registry, registered 4 years ago. Small consulting company, no website, no employees listed. Registered agent. My heart stopped. Melissa Carter, Daniel's wife, the woman who had barely spoken all evening, the woman who claimed she hated paperwork. That was impossible. Or perhaps, that was exactly why nobody suspected her. I searched further, corporate filings, annual reports, property records. Then another name appeared, managing member, Daniel Bennett. I closed my eyes. The company receiving my money belonged to my brother, but the next document made everything even worse. The registered mailing address wasn't my parents' house, it was my apartment. Someone had used my own address to create the company years ago, without telling me, without my signature, without my knowledge. If anyone investigated, it would look like I had been transferring money to a company that legally appeared connected to me. I wasn't just the victim. Someone had carefully arranged the evidence so I could become the suspect. I didn't sleep, not even for a minute. I spent the entire night building a timeline. That was what I always did when the facts became overwhelming. I organized them, not emotionally, chronologically. By sunrise, I had a spreadsheet with every suspicious transfer, every unauthorized login, every corporate filing, every tax document connected to Oak Ridge Holdings. The pattern became impossible to ignore. The money always moved within 48 hours of a family gathering. Birthdays, Christmas, Sunday dinners, my mother's annual garden party. Every event where my phone or handbag had been left unattended for a few minutes. They hadn't stolen from me once. They had scheduled it. Carefully, predictably, professionally. At 8 o'clock, my office phone rang. Margaret. She had supervised compliance investigations for almost 20 years before becoming our department director. She could hear something was wrong before I finished saying hello. Claire? What happened? I hesitated. Company policy prohibited using internal resources for personal matters. But Margaret wasn't asking as my supervisor. She was asking as the woman who had mentored me since my first day. I told her everything. Not dramatically, just facts. When I finished, she remained silent. Finally, she asked one question. Who besides your family knew how meticulous your records were? Nobody. Are you sure? I thought about it, then remembered. 3 years earlier, my father had laughed while watching me reconcile bank statements on my laptop. You're the only person I know who balances her finances for fun. Everyone around the table had laughed, including Daniel. Margaret sighed. Then this wasn't random. Someone studied your habits. They built their plan around them. That sentence stayed with me. Built their plan around me, not just stealing money, building an entire financial structure that depended on my predictable behavior. Margaret spoke again. Don't confront them, not yet. Preserve everything. Multiple backups, no edits, no annotations, original files only. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Within 2 hours, every document existed in 4 separate encrypted copies. One on my desktop, one on an external drive, one in secure cloud storage, one inside our firm's evidence preservation software, uploaded only as a time-stamped archive without opening an investigation. Then I visited the county records office during my lunch break. I wasn't looking for Oak Ridge Holdings anymore. I wanted every document ever signed under my address. The clerk returned with a surprisingly thick folder. There were business registrations, mail forwarding requests, property correspondence, state tax notices. Then one document caught my attention. Application for commercial banking services. Attached identification, applicant signature, Claire Bennett. I froze. That wasn't my signature. It looked convincing. Very convincing. Enough that most people would never question it. But I noticed something immediately. The capital C. I never wrote my capital C with a loop. Never. Not once. Even my passport signature reflected that. This one did. Someone had practiced. Not perfectly, just well enough. The application also included a witness signature. I read the name once, then again, Melissa Carter. So Melissa hadn't merely owned the company, she had personally witnessed documents pretending to bear my signature. I requested certified copies. The clerk asked politely, "Are you involved in civil litigation?" "Not yet." She stamped every page. As I walked toward my car, another realization hit me. These documents required identification, driver's license, social security number, date of birth. Whoever forged them possessed nearly everything needed to become me on paper. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder, Saturday, family barbecue, hosted by my parents. Mandatory attendance according to my mother's text from 2 weeks earlier. Normally I would have canceled, deleted the invitation, blocked every number. Instead, I smiled for the first time since the restaurant, because for the first time, I wasn't the only one collecting evidence. And if my family believed I still knew nothing, Saturday might become the day they finally exposed themselves. Before I tell you what happened at that barbecue, I want to ask you something. What would you have done? Would you have confronted them immediately? Or would you have stayed silent a little longer to uncover the whole truth? Think about your answer, because mine changed everything. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, blue sky, warm breeze. The kind of afternoon my mother loved because it made every family photo look effortless. I parked 2 houses away, not because I was nervous, because I wanted a few quiet minutes to think. In my purse sat a slim folder containing certified copies of every corporate filing, forged signature, login record, and banking transfer. Not accusations, evidence. Margaret had repeated one sentence so many times that I could hear her voice every time I touched the folder. Facts first, emotions later. As I walked into my parents' backyard, my mother greeted me as though nothing had happened at the restaurant. There she is. Everyone smiled, too easily. Daniel flipped burgers beside my father. Melissa arranged desserts. Children from neighboring families played near the garden fence. It looked normal. That was the frightening part. People capable of living two completely different realities usually became very good actors. Claire. My father handed me a glass of lemonade. Let's forget about dinner the other night. Families argue. It happens. I accepted the glass. You're right. His shoulders relaxed. Good. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. He honestly believed I had come to apologize. Lunch passed quietly. Conversations drifted from vacations to rising home prices. Every few minutes, I noticed Daniel checking his phone, not reading, waiting. Just after dessert, my mother clapped her hands. Family photo. Everyone gathered near the old maple tree, the same place where dozens of family pictures had been taken over the years. As everyone lined up, my father suddenly looked at me. Claire, could you grab your phone from your purse? We should take one with your camera too. There it was, the opportunity. Exactly like every birthday, every Christmas, every Sunday dinner, someone needed access to my phone. Only this time, I was ready. I smiled. Of course, I deliberately unlocked the screen, opened the camera, then quietly activated screen recording. After that, I handed my phone to my mother. Would you mind taking a few pictures after yours? She looked surprised. Just for a moment. Then she smiled. I'd love to. The family photographer counted backward. 3, 2, 1. Smile. Everyone laughed. Children ran across the yard. People began walking toward the patio. I stayed exactly where I was, watching. My mother carried my phone toward the kitchen instead of placing it on the table beside me. Interesting. Very interesting. I followed at a distance without making a sound. Through the half-open kitchen door, I saw her glance over both shoulders. Then she handed my phone to Daniel. He didn't open the camera. He opened the settings. My heartbeat slowed. Not faster. Slower. That always happened during investigations. Daniel connected a tiny black device to the charging port, no larger than a flash drive. Melissa stood beside the door, acting as a lookout. I quietly stepped behind the hallway wall and opened the security app on my smartwatch. The live screen recording was still running. Every touch, every menu, every password attempt, everything. 23 seconds later, Daniel disconnected the device. Too quick to copy files. Long enough to extract authentication tokens. Exactly the technique described in one of the cybersecurity seminars our compliance department had attended 6 months earlier. He handed the phone back. My mother returned outside, carrying a smile that looked completely natural. Claire, we got beautiful pictures. I thanked her, took back my phone, said nothing. The recording continued. An hour later, I left. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody suspected a thing. Back home, I transferred the recording onto my computer, frame by frame, zooming in. The tiny black device had a manufacturer logo. I enlarged the image, then searched it online. My stomach tightened. It wasn't a charger. It wasn't a storage drive. It was a forensic mobile extraction tool. The same kind many private investigators use to bypass phone security and clone authentication credentials. Normal families didn't own equipment like that. Someone had purchased it deliberately. I checked one final detail. The serial number. Visible for less than half a second. I entered it into the manufacturer's warranty database. The product was registered. 9 months earlier, registered owner, Oak Ridge Holdings. The company that had been stealing my money. But what shocked me most wasn't the name, it was the shipping address. Not my apartment, not my parents' house. It had been delivered to the office of my father's attorney. The attorney's name was Richard Hale. I knew it immediately, not because I had ever hired him, Because my father talked about him constantly. Richard handled all of Dad's business, his taxes, his property purchases, his retirement paperwork. Growing up, I thought Richard was simply the family lawyer. Now I wasn't so sure. I searched his law firm's website. Business formation, estate planning, asset protection, corporate compliance. The list of services felt painfully familiar. I opened every public filing connected to Oak Ridge Holdings again. This time, I ignored my brother's name. Instead, I focused on the signatures. Every corporate amendment, every annual filing, every registered agent update, prepared by Richard Hale. He hadn't merely represented them. He had built the company. I sat back. A lawyer would never knowingly participate in identity theft, unless he believed I had authorized everything, or someone had convinced him that I had. There was only one way to know. Monday morning, I scheduled a consultation, not under my family name, not mentioning Oak Ridge Holdings, just a routine appointment about business records. His receptionist offered me 11 o'clock. Perfect. When I arrived, Richard greeted me with the confidence of someone expecting a potential client. Claire Bennett. Please come in. His office overlooked the harbor, neat, organized. Every framed certificate perfectly aligned. He seemed like a man who valued details. So did I. After a few minutes of polite conversation, I placed a single certified document on his desk. He glanced at it, then looked at me. You prepared this filing? Yes. Standard incorporation paperwork. I slid another page toward him. And this one. Yes. Then another. And another. After the fifth document, his smile disappeared. Is there a concern? I took a slow breath. Mr. Hale, did you ever personally meet the woman whose signature appears on these documents? He looked down, then back at me. Of course, several times. No, you didn't. Silence. Because I'm Claire Bennett. And that isn't my signature. The room became completely still. Richard stared at me for several long seconds. Finally, he reached into a locked drawer, removed a thick client file, and slowly opened it. Inside were photocopies of a driver's license, a social security card, a passport. Every document carried my name. Every photograph looked like me. Yet something felt wrong. Then I realized it. The driver's license photo wasn't current. It had been copied from a license I lost almost 5 years earlier. The passport photo had been cropped from an image I posted online after a work conference. Someone had assembled my identity piece by piece. Richard looked genuinely shaken. I don't understand. Your father introduced me to you himself. My heartbeat stopped. Excuse me? He frowned. About 5 years ago, he brought his daughter Claire into this office. You discussed creating a family investment company. I said nothing. Richard continued. You hardly spoke. Your father explained you preferred letting him handle financial matters. You nodded, signed the documents, then left after about 15 minutes. Every word tightened the knot in my stomach. That wasn't me. Richard slowly removed his glasses. Then who was it? I reached into my folder, pulled out an old family photograph. My brother, standing beside me, nearly identical height. Same dark hair, same eyes. Then another photo, my cousin Emma, almost identical to me from a distance. Richard studied both, then suddenly pointed. No, neither of them. The woman who came here looked exactly like you. Exactly, my mind raced. Exactly like me. There was only one person who had ever been mistaken for me repeatedly throughout our 20s. Someone who borrowed my clothes, copied my hairstyle, even joked that we could switch places. Melissa, Daniel's wife, before she married my brother. Melissa and I had worked in the same office for almost 2 years. Back then, strangers constantly confused us. We laughed about it, until she gradually changed her hair, changed her style, changed her life. Richard looked physically ill. If what you're saying is true, I've been deceived. I nodded. I believe you have. He stood immediately, locked the office door, returned with another folder. This one was much thinner, confidential correspondence. He hesitated before opening it, then turned one page toward me. It was a handwritten note, signed by my father. Richard, keep everything discreet. Claire doesn't like dealing with paperwork. Daniel and Melissa will handle future authorizations on her behalf. Attached underneath was a notarized power of attorney, supposedly signed by me. I only needed 1 second to know it was fake, but something else caught my attention: the notary stamp. It belonged to someone whose commission had expired, almost 8 months before the document was supposedly notarized. Richard followed my eyes, his face turned white, because he realized it at exactly the same moment I did. The document wasn't just forged. It had never been legally valid, which meant every transaction executed under that authority could unravel all at once. Richard didn't speak for almost a full minute. Neither did I. He carefully placed the forged power of attorney back into the folder as though it had suddenly become radioactive. Finally, he looked directly at me. "Claire, I'm going to ask you one question. Please answer honestly. Have you contacted the police yet?" "No." "The bank?" "No." "Anyone besides my mentor?" He nodded slowly. "Good. Not because you shouldn't. Because once you do, everything changes." He opened a yellow legal pad and wrote 3 words: preserve, freeze, recover. These are now your priorities. Not revenge, not confrontation, evidence. He reached for his phone. "I need to report this to my malpractice insurer immediately. If I've been deceived, they need to know before someone else tells them." That was the moment I believed him. A guilty lawyer protects himself. An innocent lawyer protects the record. He spent the next hour printing every internal communication connected to Oak Ridge Holdings. Every email, every billing entry, every meeting note. One message stood out. From Melissa, 5 years earlier. "Claire is traveling for work again. Daniel and I can stop by instead if additional signatures are needed." Richard rubbed his forehead. "I remember this now. She always had an explanation. You were supposedly busy. Traveling, working late, recovering from migraines. There was always a reason you couldn't come in person." I smiled sadly, because I never knew any of it existed. He handed me certified copies of everything, no charge. Then he looked at me with genuine regret. "There's something else." "What?" "Your father asked me to prepare one more document 6 months ago." He opened another drawer. A sealed envelope. Across the front were my father's handwritten words, to be executed after Claire's signature. Richard slid it across the desk. I broke the seal. Inside was a trust amendment. Not for Oak Ridge Holdings, for my grandmother's estate. My grandmother had died almost 3 years earlier. According to the amendment, she had supposedly decided to divide the remainder of her estate equally between Daniel and me. That sounded fair, until I reached the last page. A paragraph had been added. "If Claire Bennett voluntarily transfers her remaining beneficiary interest into the Bennett Family Preservation Trust, management authority shall immediately pass to Daniel Bennett." I looked up. My grandmother never would have written this. Richard nodded. She didn't. This amendment was drafted 4 months after she passed away. I felt every muscle in my body tense. Someone had tried to rewrite a dead woman's wishes. Then I noticed something else. The amendment required my signature, which explained everything: the restaurant, the barbecue, my phone, the forged identities. They weren't just stealing money anymore. They were trying to obtain one genuine signature. Mine. Once I signed anything they placed in front of me, they could argue that every previous authorization had merely been administrative. The entire fraud would suddenly appear legitimate. Richard leaned forward. "Claire, do they know you've uncovered all this?" "No." "Good, keep it that way, because people become unpredictable when they realize the paper trail has collapsed." That evening, my parents invited the entire family to dinner again, this time at their house. The text from my mother was unusually warm. "Let's put everything behind us. We miss you." 10 minutes later, Daniel sent another message. "Dad has something important he wants to give you." I stared at those words. Something important. I already knew what it was: a document, a pen, and one final attempt to make me sign away everything they hadn't managed to steal yet. I picked up my phone, not to answer them, to call the only person who hadn't asked me to forgive. Margaret. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said only one sentence: "Then don't go there alone." An hour later, I pulled into my parents' driveway. But this time, I wasn't the only one getting out of a car. Margaret stepped out first, calm, composed. She wasn't carrying a weapon. She was carrying a slim leather briefcase. Behind her came someone I had never expected my family to see. Ethan Ruiz, senior investigator from our healthcare network's compliance division. He wasn't there as law enforcement. He wasn't even there as my colleague. He was there because 6 months earlier, I had helped uncover a multi-million-dollar procurement fraud, and our department had developed strict evidence preservation procedures. Ethan knew exactly how to document conversations without contaminating evidence. My parents' smiles disappeared the moment they saw we weren't alone. Mom forced a laugh. "Claire, who are your friends?" I answered honestly. "People who appreciate accurate paperwork." Nobody laughed. Inside, the dining room looked strangely formal. Crystal glasses, fresh flowers, a fountain pen placed neatly beside a leather folder, exactly where I expected it. Dad noticed me looking. "We just have a few estate documents. Nothing complicated." I smiled. "I'm sure." Dinner was painfully polite. Everyone avoided the restaurant. Nobody mentioned Oak Ridge Holdings. Nobody mentioned the barbecue. They acted like a family trying to repair a misunderstanding. Only one thing betrayed them. The folder never left the table. Eventually, Dad cleared his throat. "Claire? Before dessert. Could you sign something for us?" There it was. Melissa immediately slid the folder toward me. Daniel uncapped the expensive fountain pen. Mom smiled warmly. "It's only to simplify Grandma's estate. Nothing changes. Just routine paperwork." I didn't touch the folder. Instead, I asked one question. "Who drafted these documents?" Dad hesitated. "Richard." I nodded slowly. "Interesting." "Because Richard met with me yesterday." The room froze. Melissa's fingers tightened around her napkin. Dad didn't speak. I continued. "He also gave me copies of every document your family ever asked him to prepare in my name." Nobody moved. I opened my own briefcase. One by one, I placed certified copies across the dining table. Corporate filings, forgery comparisons, bank login reports, business registrations, the expired notary commission, the forged power of attorney. Nobody reached for them. They already knew what they were. Daniel finally stood. "This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion." I looked directly at him. "Then explain why Oak Ridge Holdings received nearly $80,000 from my accounts." Silence. "Explain why unauthorized logins came from Mom and Dad's internet connection." Silence. "Explain why Melissa witnessed signatures I never signed." Melissa burst into tears. "I never wanted this." Daniel turned toward her. "Stop talking. Too late. Much too late." Margaret quietly opened her briefcase. She wasn't recording. She simply began making handwritten notes with timestamps, exactly as she had taught me years ago. Dad suddenly slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. We were trying to protect this family." I looked at him. "From what?" He answered without thinking. "From you." The room became completely silent. For the first time, someone had finally said it aloud. Dad took a long breath. "You were always the responsible one. You always had money. You always landed on your feet." Daniel struggled. He made bad investments. He had debts. We couldn't lose him. Mom began crying. "We always meant to pay everything back." "When?" Nobody answered. Melissa whispered through tears. "It started with one transfer. Just one. Then Daniel said he'd replace it after selling a property, but he lost more money. Then another investment failed. Then we had to create the company because the bank started asking questions." Every sentence made the story clearer. Not better, just clearer. It hadn't begun as an elaborate conspiracy. It had begun as one dishonest decision, then another, until lying became easier than stopping. I asked the question that had haunted me for days. "Why did you need my signature tonight?" Nobody answered. Instead, Mom quietly looked at Dad. That was answer enough. Dad lowered his head. "Because your grandmother left you something she never told us about." My heart skipped. He slowly reached into a kitchen drawer, not the folder. A sealed envelope, yellowed with age. My grandmother's handwriting covered the front. "For Claire only." Dad swallowed hard. "She gave it to me 2 weeks before she died. She said not to open it. Not unless you came asking questions one day." I stared at the envelope. Everything inside me told me not to trust him. Then I noticed the wax seal. Untouched, unbroken. For 3 years, he had never opened it. I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter, and one small brass key taped to the final page. The letter began with words that brought tears to my eyes. Claire, if you are reading this, it means someone finally forced you to look where you never wanted to look. I looked up. Nobody at the table breathed. I turned to the second page, then the third. By the time I reached the end, I understood why my grandmother had never trusted anyone except me. The key wasn't for a safe. It wasn't for a house. It belonged to a private bank deposit box that none of my family knew existed. And according to the final line of her letter, everything they had spent the last 6 years trying to steal was only a fraction of what she had actually left behind. I held the brass key so tightly that the edges pressed into my palm. Nobody spoke. For the first time all evening, nobody was trying to convince me of anything. My grandmother's handwriting was unmistakable. Neat, steady, confident. The final page contained only one paragraph. Claire, if anyone ever pressures you to sign documents after I'm gone, do not sign a single page until you open the deposit box. Everything you need to understand our family is already waiting there. I folded the letter carefully, then looked at my father. Did you know what was inside? He slowly shook his head. No. She refused to tell me. She only said the key belonged to you. Then why keep it from me for 3 years? He couldn't answer, because there wasn't a good answer. Margaret finally spoke, quietly. Claire, let's leave. Everything else can wait until tomorrow. I nodded. As we stood, Daniel suddenly stepped between me and the door. You don't understand. That box belongs to all of us. No. I looked him straight in the eye. Grandma disagreed. The next morning we arrived at First Harbor Private Bank. The vault manager compared my identification with records that hadn't been touched in years. Everything matched. He smiled politely. Mrs. Bennett, your grandmother visited this box every December for almost 15 years. She always said one day her granddaughter would understand why. He disappeared through a heavy steel door. A few minutes later, he returned carrying a small gray deposit box. He placed it in front of me, then quietly left the room. Only Margaret remained. Neither of us spoke. I inserted the brass key, turned it, lifted the lid. Inside wasn't gold, or jewelry, or stacks of cash. It was something far more valuable. 3 leather journals, several sealed envelopes, a USB drive, a thick binder, and one handwritten note resting on top. Truth survives longer than money. I opened the binder first. Every page contained copies, bank statements, canceled checks, property deeds, family loans, personal letters, receipts dating back almost 25 years. My grandmother had documented everything, every dollar she had ever loaned my parents, every promise they had made, every repayment they had failed to make. She hadn't distrusted me. She had distrusted everyone else. Then I opened the first journal. My grandmother had written after every important family event. Not gossip, facts, dates, names, amounts. One entry stopped me cold. Daniel asked Claire to co-sign a business loan today. She refused politely. I am proud of her. He believes she doesn't trust him. He is correct. Another, Margaret Bennett, that was my mother, asked whether Claire's inheritance could be transferred without her knowledge. My breathing stopped. The date, 9 years earlier, long before any money disappeared, long before Oak Ridge Holdings existed. This hadn't started with Daniel's debt. They had been looking for ways to control my inheritance for almost a decade. I kept reading. The final journal covered my grandmother's last year. Its final pages were different. Instead of observations, she wrote instructions. If Claire ever discovers unauthorized transfers, contact these people. 3 names: a retired judge, her longtime accountant, her financial advisor. Each had signed sworn statements confirming exactly how my inheritance was structured. Then I noticed the USB drive. Inside were scanned originals of every trust document, each digitally time-stamped years before my grandmother died. Impossible to alter without leaving evidence. Margaret smiled for the first time in days. Your grandmother built this like an audit file. I laughed through tears. She knew exactly who I would become. The following weeks passed in meetings instead of arguments. The bank froze every account connected to the fraudulent transfers. Richard Hale voluntarily disclosed everything his office possessed. The accountant confirmed my grandmother's records matched his own. The retired judge signed an affidavit verifying her intentions, one by one. Every missing piece found its place. No dramatic courtroom speech, no surprise witness, just documents, evidence, facts. Exactly the language my family had underestimated my entire life. When the financial reconstruction was complete, the numbers shocked even the investigators. Nearly $80,000 had been taken directly from me. Another $300,000 had been diverted from trust income. Multiple corporate filings had been forged. Identity documents had been falsified. The consequences were no longer mine to decide. They belonged to the legal system. Months later, I visited my grandmother's grave. I placed fresh white lilies beside the headstone. Then I read the final sentence from her letter one last time. Real wealth is not what you leave behind. It is whether the truth survives after you are gone. For years I believed my greatest strength was my ability to forgive. I was wrong. My greatest strength had always been something much quieter. Paying attention, keeping records, asking one more question when everyone else wanted the conversation to end. I didn't get my family back, but I got something better. Peace, boundaries, friends who stood beside me without asking what they could gain. Margaret became the family I chose. The people I worked with became the people I trusted. And every time I unlock the drawer where my grandmother's journals now rest, I remember one simple lesson. Truth does not have to shout. It only has to be preserved. That is how my story ended. Not with revenge, not with anger, but with the quiet certainty that no one would ever again decide my worth, my future, or my voice for me. 1 year later, I stood in front of a building that finally felt like home. Not because it was expensive, not because my name was on the deed, because every brick represented a choice I had made for myself. The brass key from my grandmother now rested inside a small shadow box in my office. Next to it sat one page from her journal. Only one sentence. Truth survives longer than money. I read it every Monday morning. Not because I needed the reminder, because I wanted to remember who taught me that quiet strength often changes more lives than anger ever could. Margaret retired 3 months after everything was over. The day she left, she handed me the office key. Your turn, she said. Today I lead the compliance division she spent 28 years building. Sometimes younger investigators ask why I insist on documenting every tiny detail. I simply smile. Because little details become big truths. Richard rebuilt his reputation one client at a time. He publicly admitted his mistakes, cooperated fully, and changed every verification procedure inside his practice. He now requires every client to appear in person with biometric verification. He once sent me a handwritten letter. Thank you for holding me accountable before someone innocent paid for my mistake. I framed that letter. Not because I forgave what happened, because accountability deserves to be remembered. As for my parents, the court handled their financial responsibility. The emotional consequences were something they had to face on their own. Months passed before my mother wrote to me. The letter contained no excuses, no requests for money, only one sentence. I finally understand that helping one child by sacrificing another was never love. I didn't answer immediately. Some wounds need silence before words. Daniel and Melissa disappeared from my daily life. I genuinely hope they someday become honest people. But I no longer measure my happiness by whether they change. That burden isn't mine anymore. Every Christmas, I still visit my grandmother. I bring white lilies. I tell her about my year. Sometimes I laugh. Sometimes I cry. Then I thank her. Not for leaving me money, for leaving me the courage to trust facts when emotions tried to blind me. Looking back, people often assume this story was about $80,000. It never was. It was about something worth far more. The moment I stopped believing that love required endless sacrifice. The moment I understood that boundaries are not punishment, they are self-respect. And the greatest inheritance my grandmother ever left me was never hidden inside a bank vault. It was the confidence to stand alone when everyone else expected me to stay silent. If my story reminds even one person to trust their instincts, keep their records, and never apologize for protecting their own dignity, then every painful chapter was worth writing. Because peace doesn't arrive the day justice is served. It arrives the day you finally stop asking people to become the family they already chose not to be. And that was the day I finally became my own home.